Welcome back to Your Lake Fork Guide. Today we're going to do a how-to instructional video, in-depth like always, on, in my opinion, what is the #1 bite-getting technique that you can use day in, day out, year-round for bass. Today we're going to do a how-to instructional on the wacky worm. So, wacky worm fishing. To start out, just so you know, traditional plastic worms are rigged in a Texas rig style. That's going to be a weedless rig where the hook runs in line with the bait and the worm trails behind the hook with the weight right above the head of the worm. This is completely different. What you do when you wacky rig is you actually put the hook in the middle of the worm like so. It gives the bait a completely different action, completely different fall. But first, what I want to go over is the different worms that I use when I'm wacky worm fishing. #1, day in, day out, everyday worm that I want to use is going to be the Zoom trick worm. I'm sure everybody's seen those before, but that's my all conditions. If you went out and threw this 365 days a year, there would be very few days that you would zero out wacky worm and a Zoom trick worm. The other option from Zoom that I use, and this is sometimes, if I'm just looking for a bigger bite and I'm not so much worried about number of bites, or if I'm fishing a little bit deeper, I'll use the Zoom Mag trick worm, Zoom Magnum trick worm. It's just a little bit bigger version of the same thing. I also like to use some ring worms, and those are from Lake Fork Trophy Lures, and this is actually called the Ring Fry. And this is actually not sold like this. What this is a Lake Fork Trophy Lures 10-inch worm that I tear the tail off of. These are great on high-pressured lakes like Fork because it's something different that they don't always see. I mean, wacky worm in itself is really for a pressured lake. It's for bass that don't want to bite. It's a finesse technique. And this is just another step to that, adding these worms to your arsenal to get you even more bites on a pressured lake. And lastly, what I'll use is probably the most common one is Cincos. This is a 5-inch and this is a 6-inch. The 5-inch Cinco, I know that I'll probably get beat over the head. I'll get grilled about this. I almost never wacky rig the 5-inch Cinco. Very rarely will I do that. The 6-inch, on the other hand, in the springtime, I use a ton wacky rigged. Like I said, every day, day in, day out, Zoom trick worm is the one I use. I will use this bait right here year round. If the fish are shallow, I will throw this bait year round on days where the bite is tough. Couple different tricks to rigging these baits. #1 is the hook placement. I know a lot of people like to use the O-rings and the wacky tools to get that ring on there, and then the hook just rests in that ring itself. I don't like that personally. I want the hook to be in the worm. Remember, we're fishing the wacky worm when the bite is tough. Fish aren't biting good. So there's a lot of times where they don't even get the whole worm and you'll miss them. So I want that hook to be in that worm. I don't want to give them any extra 1/4 of an inch to where they can grab worm and not get hooked. So the #1 problem you get when you do that is when you cast, the worm will tear off sometimes. And it's going to happen when you hook them like this. You're going to lose some worms. Even with that O-ring tool, you're going to tear some worms in half every once in a while. So what I'll do to help prevent that on the Zoom trick worm is when I'm hooking that bait, I'll actually favor one side. They've got that little seam in the middle like all of them do, but I'll actually take this bait, and instead of just going directly into the middle of the worm, I'll move it over to the side. So I'll be right on the outside edge of the worm. And I always want to make sure that that skinny part, and you can hopefully you can see that now, I always want to make sure that the skinny side of where I hooked it is on the outside of the hook. Because when I throw that bait, when I cast it, all the pressure is going to be pulling this way. So I want the fat side of the worm to be on this side. So that's one trick. The other trick, and I'm actually down to my last one, I've got to buy some more, but these are Lunker City nail weights. And I'll actually take that and break it in half, and I stick it in the head of the worm. So I'll go ahead and pull the one out of here that's in here for you. Okay, so here's one of those nail weights that I just broke right in half. and you just want to stick it down in the head. And simple, just try to keep the worm as straight as you can while you're doing this. But the main thing is, like right here, you can still see it's all the way in, but you can still see that nail sticking out of the head of the worm. If you leave it like that, when you cast, eventually that nail weight's going to sling out there, and you're not even going to be aware of it, but your worm's just going to be falling like this. So what you want to do is make sure that you push that nail weight all the way down in there. So what I'll do is I'll push it down as far as I can, and then I'll pinch the worm till I feel the weight, and then I'll pull the head back over it. So now I have a soft gap, and the nail weight actually starts down here and goes to down here now. So you want to make sure it's all the way in there. The reason we use that nail weight is that's going to allow this bait to fall nose down. It'll fall just like this. It'll fall at about this speed right here. And with that nail weight, with it pointing down, that tail will just have the most ever so subtle kick behind it. The tail will just kind of wiggle back and forth a little bit. And on top of that, when it hits bottom, that worm will stand on its head and stand up, and that tail will move with the water movement. So it helps you get more action on the bait. So that's how I do the zoom trick worm. On the mag trick worm, everything that I just said is exactly the same, except I don't break the nail weight in half. I use the entire nail weight on the mag trick worms. And like I said, I'm usually fishing that when I'm fishing deeper. If I'm fishing more than 8 foot or so, I'm going to go to this one with the full nail weight. On the ring fries, same exact thing as the trick worms. And it's fished the same exact way. Like I said, this is just another look. Something different that moves a little different, feels a little different when it moves through the water to the fish. Helps you get a few more bites on those really pressured lakes. Cinco is a lot different, however. On the Cinco, I do the hook the same, where I favor one side on the hook, but I use no nail weight. I actually want that Cinco to fall like this. I primarily use this bait in the springtime when they're spawning, and so I want that bait to stay in their face as long as possible, so I don't want any extra weight. And also, these Cincos, they have that unique action where they just wiggle as they go down. You know, it's kind of, you got that hook in the center, and the tail and the head are just bobbing back and forth as it sinks perfectly horizontally. So I don't want to take that away from it. So that's why I use it like that. And this bait in the springtime, I'm telling you, it is awesome. The 6-inch, you're not going to get near as many bites on it. It's kind of like the mag trick worm that way. But man, I've really caught some big fish. And if you guys will stay tuned to the end of the video, I'm going to put some pictures at the end of the video and show you guys. And every one of those fish will be a fish that was caught on this exact worm, Wacky rig, this spring. Okay, for rod and reel and line setup, let's start with the line. You know, this is a finesse technique. You need all the sensitivity that you can have. So I always use fluorocarbon. So I'll use 12 pound and 15 pound for this technique 100% of the time. On the reel, you know, it doesn't really matter much, to be honest with you, on the reel what gear ratio you use, because you're never going to move the bait with the reel handle. You're always going to move the bait with the rod. You're only taking up slack with your reel handle. For that fact, you're probably a little better off going with a high-speed reel, but I use a medium retrieve, and you know, it doesn't seem to bother me any in the least. The one thing that I will say, this is probably my favorite reel that I own. It's an old Team Daiwa Advantage 1500 series, something like that, but it's a really old reel. I've had it since I think I was a teenager, and it's a really smooth reel. You have to have a high quality smooth reel to throw this light bait on a bait caster. You can do it on a spinning rod, and that's fine. If you got kids, this is a great technique for kids and beginners. You can use the closed face Zebcos or whatever, and that works fine. But if you want to do it on a bait caster, you better have a good quality reel. This rod right here is a 7.3 medium heavy. That being said, this rod, found that they seem to run a little bit lighter than what they read. You're going to want a medium to maybe a lighter medium heavy, and that's what this one is. But this is actually my favorite rod for wacky worming. I like having that extra length. This rod's got a lot of tip to it, but it still has a lot of torque down here in the bottom. That's what you want. You want a soft enough tip to where you can easily cast the worm and handle it, but you still want to have as much backbone as you can while being able to cast it good. So that's this setup. So as far as the areas that I want to look for when I'm trying to fish a wacky worm, you know, it kind of depends on what kind of cover I'm wanting to fish. If it's, you know, mostly timber like we have here, then the main thing that you have to look for that is a must-have is going to be the elevation changes. And it changes throughout the season. In the fall, I'm going to want steeper drops. Those fish, in my opinion, relate more to the steeper drops and the transition areas that have steeper angles on them than they do in the spring. In the springtime, I've got to have a big, massive flat next to my drains or my creek channels. So that's what I'm going to look for in the springtime. I want a big flat, but I want an elevation change on the outside edge of it. In the fall, I don't have to have as much room. I just need a sharp angle where they can go from deep to shallow and back to deep as fast as possible. When it comes to grass, it's a little bit different. It really, to me, when you're fishing grass, you want the elevation changes, you want the creek channels and drains, all that stuff matters, yes. But what matters most, in my opinion, when you're fishing a grass flat, is the healthiness and the quality of that grass. They can be acres and acres and acres of grass, and I know you've all heard this, there'll be one little spot they're on. A lot of time that has multiple factors to it. It'll be a hard, clean bottom, but it'll also, most of the time, it will be the healthiest, most oxygen producing grass in that stretch. That'll be where they are. That's what you want to look for. Those fish are going to utilize all the edges of that grass, but they're going to be really close to the healthiest grass they can have, because that's going to put off the most oxygen, provide the most cover for the bait fish. It's just going to be the best, most healthiest environment in that area. That's kind of a thing that takes time to learn. You've got to learn what different grass looks like, but once you see healthy grass versus not healthy grass, it'll be really obvious to you. So take some time, learn about grass, experiment with the grass flat. Obviously, same kind of deal applies. You want a ditch or a drain, some type of elevation change for them to relate to coming in and out of it, and you want the edges of the grass for them to relate to coming in and out of it. But make sure when you're fishing massive grassy areas that you're looking for that healthy vegetation. Alright, so that covers it for the equipment and the gear that I use to wacky worm. Now I'm going to get up and show you guys how I work the bait, how I retrieve it to get bites on the wacky worm. For the techniques that I use to catch fish on the wacky worm, it's not too complicated. There's kind of two different ways we do it. One is to fish timber, and one is to fish grass. Right now, as you guys can see behind me, we're on a timber flat. There's no grass here. So I'm going to do the timber technique first. So what you want to do is pick a target. So you pick your target, so we're going to just pick a stump out here. What you want to do is just throw your bait as close to it as you can right beside it. So we're right beside that stump right there. So I want to start stripping line. It's very important because you want that bait to fall straight down beside that stump. You don't want it to swing away from it in any direction. So once that bait's falling straight down beside that stump, once it's all the way on the bottom, the other key here that I just forgot to mention is you definitely want to always watch your line. You know, with this technique, you're feeding that bait line, you're going to pop it, it's going to always have some slack in your line. So you're not always going to feel the bite, but if you'll watch your line, when they bite it, you'll see a little jump. And when they do that, you know you got them. So once it's all the way on the bottom, what I'll do is raise up on it, and I'll leave just a little bit of slack in my line, and I'm going to give it several short, sharp pops. You want to make sure that you pop it hard, but don't do it, you don't want to raise your rod way up, just short and sharp. Just like that, just 3-4 quick pops and then let it fall again. Just like that. And once I've done that 2 or 3 times, and then once I feel like I've moved away from that target, I will then reel it in and then do it again on the next target. So I'm not going to fish the bait all the way back to the boat. That takes a long time when you do it like that. I'm going to go from target to target, let the bait sit there for a good while, pop it, rest, pop it, rest, bring it in, do it again. Most of your bites, I would say it's kind of 50-50. A lot of your bites are going to come on the initial fall, and the rest of your bites are going to come right after you've popped it while it's falling. You get 100% of your bites on the fall. Very, very rarely am I shaking that bait and have a fish try to take it from me. Almost every single bite comes on the fall. So the other school of thought is fishing grass with a wacky worm. It's a very good tool on a tough day. If you've got them located in a grass flat, but they're just not biting good, it's a very good tool to save your day and get you some bites. On that one, the target doesn't matter as much because you're fishing grass. So what you want to do is, if you've got an area that you know they're in, but they're not biting and you got grass, you just make as long a cast as you can. And what will happen on this bait, when it falls down in that grass, in this technique, what I actually want to do, once it's down in there and it's quit falling, it's down in the grass, I want to ease up on it till I feel it. It'll pull, that grass will pull it down. So once I feel the weight of that grass, I'm then going to shake it until that bait pops free, and once it pops free, I'm going to hit it 2 more times and I'm going to let it fall back down in the grass. So feel the weight of the grass, shake it, when it pops free, pop it twice, 2 or 3 times more, and then let it fall back down in the grass. That you can do all the way back to the boat. I wouldn't bother doing it all the way back to the boat, but you know, a good 10, once you're 10-15 foot out, go ahead and reel it in. But you can definitely cover a lot more water. This method will take a long time to cover water, so you better know where the fish are when you go to do this. It's a finesse technique. It'll get the bites for you if they're in there, but it's not an effective way to cover a lot of ground. So you better know there's fish there if you're going to fish a big grass flat with a wacky worm. Alright guys, that's it for how to wacky worm. Like I said, it is the absolute #1 bite getter year-round, day in, day out that I can think of for bass fishing. If you've got a wife that wants to get into fishing, if you've got a beginner, if you've got a kid, this is an absolute must-learn technique for them. It'll keep them interested. They'll get a ton of bites. They'll catch a lot of fish. If you don't think it'll catch a big fish, check these pictures out. Alright guys, as you see, some really big fish get caught on this bait. It's not just a little fish technique, but you will catch a lot of little fish doing it, but that's part of the joy. You get a lot of bites doing this deal. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. I hope you're able to learn something from it. If you like that video, hit that thumbs up for me. If you want to see more like it, see our other how-tos, see some of our Day on the Water series, check out the channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. It'll notify you every time we do a new video. And we appreciate y'all watching. See you next time. I'll throw it to you. Throw the bait. Wow, that was horrendous. That thing doesn't cast quite like a
They can't.
worm. Feel the difference between the grass and the bite. It's a real sensitive thing. Oh, God, that sucks. Just mumbling over myself.